am here with my dear friend Terrell Starr of the Essential Black Diplomats podcast and Substack, which you can find in the show notes for this week's episode. Hey, Terrell.
What's going on? Welcome from Oxford, Ohio.
Where he's speaking. He is on a national speaking tour. Thank you so much for making time for Gaslit Nation. So obviously, I've wanted to chat with you about this. You and I were sending each other clips back and forth about the State of the Union. You sent me a Suge Knight clip to capture how you felt Biden's performance went. So far, Biden has raked in $10 million in fundraising dollars following the State of the Union. And that's already on a massive war chest advantage that the Democrats have going into this election up against a career criminal who is a fake billionaire who owes $500 million in legal fees, including to a woman he raped out of the many dozens of women that credibly accused him of rape. Now, I want to just go into a bit on some of the highlights real quick of the State of the Union. Biden stared down the Supreme Court justices to their faces and basically challenged their very legitimacy, which they hate because it really does. The mullah justices, the extreme Supremes, are giving all sorts of speeches trying to reassure people they're not actually extreme ideologues, but they are. So they hate the fact that they're seen as totally illegitimate and hated, and that their approval ratings have never been this low ever. There was Biden led a call and response over oligarchy's high taxes. He came out the gates swinging on Ukraine. He announced the Gaza pier, did not give us the permanent ceasefire that we desperately need. And then he stayed until the lights turned off. And all the time, Mike Johnson, Kremlin tool, was turning red and shrinking behind him. It was like a British Prime Minister question time. Very, very fiery, a lot of 1-2 punches that we needed to see, obviously, from Biden, and he's been rewarded with the fundraising dollars. So how do you felt the State of the Union went? What were some highlights for you?
I thought about Jungle Fever. There's this scene where Flipper the architect was getting fired, and when he was leaving the office, he was just pointing to all the stuff that belonged to him. He said, mine, 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 mine. And when he was walking past whatever it was, some voice said, mine. See that? Mine, 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 mine. And it has been the talk, the address to the American public that we have wanted from him since his presidency, because we've both talked about all the great things that he has done during his first term, but they don't really promote it a lot. And so a lot of the American public don't understand all the things that he's doing so well. And this State of the Union address was one of the best that I've seen in a very long time. And so this was him just showing people who he was. And that Suge Knight, and I wish we could pull it up, but like that Suge Knight clip that I showed you all, if you all are, 80s or 90s babies, and if you're all somewhat familiar with hip hop, you all can recall the Source Awards, and I forgot which year it was, but basically Suge Knight came up on stage and said, if you don't want the producer dancing in your videos and trying to be the main event, come to Death Row. And so that was Biden saying, hey, if you don't want to get all this kleptocracy and all this fascism and this racism and this anti-womanness and literally having somebody that's been credibly accused of rape multiple times represent y'all, vote for Joe Biden, right? Like it was like the most gangster shit that I saw coming from a State of the Union address, and it was very much needed. And he needs to keep doing it because that's the fire with which we want to show. And so for those folks who thought that he was this feeble-minded person who was slow, he was very spry with his language. He was very energetic and he was very fiery, and that's what we're looking for. And that's the type of fire that's going to be needed to match the fervor of the MAGA horde that's going to be going to the polls in November. And so I thought that was a really great job. And it left Senator Katie Britt in shambles, right? Beyond the sexist way that it was that her State of the Union was set up in the kitchen. Because despite how much I despise that woman and in her ilk, she is a United States senator, 40 years old. I believe she's the youngest senator, at least one of them. I think that the gentleman out of Georgia may be the youngest one. I think he's 39 or something. I forgot his name.
Yeah,
But
John
basic,
Ossoff.
yeah, John Ossoff, right? I think he's like 39 or something. But at any rate, um, the way that they position her, they wanted. I know we're going to talk about it, but I think that his speech was so good, it made hers look weak. It made her response look incredibly weak.
Katie
Yeah.
Britt's performance looked like a hostage video, and the hostage taker is white male patriarchy. She was like, "Help me, help me."
Right. I mean, because here's the thing, right? Like, it just shows you how pathological the white male patriarchy is, because that's how much that they can minimize a United States senator. That's the whole thing. So if you want to be a United States senator, and if you want to fall within that MAGA category, be Katie Britt.
Yep.
Right.
Into
So
the kitchen for you.
and into the kitchen for you. And so if you saw the photos of her husband just and her kids towering over her. Now, an important thing to note, however, is that her delivery was not targeted towards me or you. It was targeted to that very specific group of MAGA women who make up a large portion of their electorate. And so in that regard, I think she was very effective. Now, what that should tell us is that the people who are drawn to Biden's speech, we need to come out in droves, right? We are the ones that really need to come out in record breaking numbers, because for as many of us that were turned off by Senator Katie Britt, and I'm going to keep on saying again, despite how much I despise her, she's a U.S. senator, and I just have to keep calling her a U.S. senator because the way in which she was presented, you would think that she was nothing of the sort, which speaks to the power of their patriarchal construct, is that no matter how great you are, we're going to relegate you to the kitchen. Now, here's the thing. There is nothing wrong with being a stay-at-home mom. In fact, the people who made me, look, my grandmother, the one who raised me, was a domestic maid. Okay. She had a third grade education. The smartest person I knew who helped me to be who I am was that mother who was a domestic maid and who taught me how to cook and taught me how to work a stove when I wasn't even 10 years old. So, but it's not about that, right? So it's not the issue of her being a stay-at-home mom. That is the issue. It's how they relegate stay-at-home moms, as if they don't, as if they're supposed to be the guardians of the house and nothing else. And that you're supposed to be the guardians of the house, and you're not supposed to go beyond that. And even if you do, we're going to remind you of where you belong. So it's a pejorative. So the way that they described the stay-at-home mom and the people that they were targeting, it was a very pejorative manner in which they framed them, which fits under their patriarchy.
I knew we were entering the twilight zone when the national news anchor, I believe it was for ABC News I was watching, introduced Katie Britt by saying this. This was his introduction to her. He said, "And now here's Katie Britt, a mother of two." And that's when I was like, oh no. Oh no, America, you're in trouble. And then they go to Katie Britt and she just terrifies all of us. Like our wombs were shaking. You know what I mean? They're going to take away
Right.
our wombs' freedom and our lives. Because when I was pregnant with my second, it was a high risk pregnancy. My doctor sat me down and said, "Hey, you know that vacation you had planned where you're going to get on a flight? That's over now. That's canceled. You might bleed to death. You have a high risk pregnancy. We may need to abort it to save your life. And just so you know, I'm morally obligated to tell you, if it comes down between you and your unborn child, we're going to save you. All right?" And when I conveyed all that to my husband's like, "Of course, without question." Like, and the way the doctor delivered all the news was just so smooth, like so just like matter of fact, the weather report, and this conversation that we're having is criminalized right now in many parts of the country and growing. And that is what Katie Britt wants to do to all of us everywhere. Like Mike Pence says he wants all of us here, wherever we live, to live under the rules of Mississippi. Like this is like some real, I know you've heard it a million times before, but it is some real handmade shit. Like Alabama is where the Supreme Court says we're going to criminalize IVF, and then they choose this Alabama senator. And guess what? Her colleague, Tommy Tuberville, who, along with Mike Johnson, is one of the Kremlin's biggest helpers in weakening our democracy from within, where he had that ridiculous, horrible, just so demoralizing protest in the Senate where he refused to do promotions for months of our military servicemen and women, holding up their hard-earned cash for months and like slowing down all these appointments we needed for our national security. And Putin was just licking his chops at this and making advancements in Ukraine while his buddy Mike Johnson is holding up Ukraine aid, right? This is all like a 1-2 punch by Putin against us. And Tommy Tuberville, like, when he was asked about Katie Britt, like Tommy Tuberville, traitor to our country, he said, oh, she's great. She's a housewife. Like, you know what I mean? That was the first thing out of his mouth. Like, that's what they want for us. And I remember, and it's been forever. It's been generations that they've been building towards this. I remember back in 2004, my first job out of college, I was a community organizer in a battleground state. And the campaign I was working for sent me, a young kid, to go undercover to a Republican fundraiser and just have a listen, right? And so I put on my conservative best. I had like a red, cute little sweater, like a sparkly shirt underneath. Like I had my hair like all smooth.
Do you have a
I got my
photo of
pink.
yourself?
Sure. I'll do some cosplay next time you're over. But here's GOP Andrea. But like, so I show up there looking not, very Pollyanna-ish, more than usual. And I go, but I betray myself. I go immediately for the food. And I'm just shoving my face at the food. And I look around and I'm the only woman eating. So I finally sit down next to a group of like GOP women who are all gossiping together. And this is what they're talking about. They're talking about how to get a husband. And they're saying, oh, you don't cut your hair if you want a husband. And I look and none of these women are eating. I'm the only one eating. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to give myself away as a liberal, like hairy feminist hippie by just being like, the lone woman in this party shoving my face. They're gonna catch me. But it gave me so much insight to the prison that these women are trapped in mentally. And it's like, you have to be a damaged, insecure human being to subject yourself to that. And you have to be a damaged, insecure human being to desire that. So the men who are doing this are just as pathetic as the women who allow it to be done to them.
Absolutely. And the tough thing, another thing about her response that really was so ironic was the way in which she talked about undocumented people. And one of the constant refrains of the GOP when they're referring to the undocumented is illegal. And we all know that we don't refer to human beings as illegal, right? But she just joined a tradition of conservatives and folks who are very xenophobic towards immigrants by talking about crime rates and bringing up some case in which some woman was sexually assaulted, even though she was fact checking and said at the time that particular assault didn't happen during Biden's administration. But she fear mongers about the undocumented, and I'm really happy that NPR brought up some much needed research. And I'm just going to say, name out some of these numbers. And it's coming from a recent NPR article that came from a couple of days ago when it talked about crime and the undocumented. And it stated that for the New York Times and the Marshall Project, they found that between 2007 and 2016, there was no link between undocumented immigrants and the rise of violent crime or property crime, in certain communities. And then also talked about the fact that this is something from the Cato Institute. They looked into Texas in 2009. They found that undocumented immigrants were 37.1% less likely to be convicted of a crime. And so these numbers can go on and on and on to show you that there is not a direct correlation between undocumented immigration and crime. And for those who are intellectually honest within their party, they genuinely know that, but they don't care about honesty. They care about the fear mongering. which is why it's so effective. And so when I listened to her talk about this, and you see the tears, like it almost looked like she was going to break down and cry. And so it was just a heavily scripted talk,
It was
and
like
she
that
just went
moment in Get Out where the black guy in the party
right.
is like, "Get out!" Like the tears going down his face. That the real her was trying to break
Exactly,
out.
exactly. But here's the thing: after watching her talk, I didn't fear the undocumented. I feared white women like her. Those are the ones that are going to get my black ass killed.
The Queen of
That
Auschwitz.
I'm
Yeah.
yeah, the Queen of Auschwitz, but also there was this film, and I forgot the name of it. It was a depiction of slavery, and it was directed by a black British director. You know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about, right? And it
Brilliant
just
film.
and
Brilliant
it just
film.
evades me, right? And
7
so
Years a Slave.
7 years a slave,
Steve
and
McQueen.
Steve
Gorgeous film.
McQueen, right?
Powerful.
Steve McQueen, and then you know that there was that white woman who was the mistress of the
Mhm.
wealthy
Mhm.
owner of the enslaved people. Is that she was talking to the main character, essentially saying, well, if you do so and so and so, you'll get, I guess, X amount of lashes. And so she reminds me of the slave owner's wife. She was a very terrifying person in that film. And when I think about Katie Britt, I think about the slave owner's wife. She is a person that evokes fear in me more so than this wackadoodle story about this undocumented, about undocumented people who are more than likely to commit crimes against us than anyone else. And so here's the thing: if she's doing that for the undocumented, when it's politically convenient for her, she'll do it for black people. I mean, the person that's the altar of Donald Trump. Donald Trump uses black people to ratchet up crime. He talks about Chicago all the time. And so she left me not fearing the undocumented. She made me terrified of her. And the way that and so the way that they package it, she's this young, kind of unassuming, faint, white woman that just craves faiety. So it really encapsulates the 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 type of quote unquote purity of the woman and of the white woman, right? And so that's the type of white woman that the Republicans like. They don't like white women, and I think I brought this up in the last episode. They don't like white women like Gretchen Whitmer or the women that are running the state of Michigan. They, with via their vigilante MAGA supporters, want to kidnap them and kill them. That's where they go. And so I think that this message that we take from the State of the Union is that Kate Britt really reinforces the fact that we ought to be terrified not only of MAGA, but this white, but even the people who may not say that they're MAGA, but this white contingency that aids and abets them, which is quite frankly the rest of the GOP, because they're not doing much at all to defend themselves against them because they don't care about the country, they don't love America, they love their whiteness, and Katie Britt is a prime. She is exhibit A of that.
And another connection to slavery. So the Confederacy, the centuries of slavery, these so-called Christians perverted the very concepts of Christianity to justify their enslavement of human beings, to justify their torture, dehumanization, separation of family, systemic rape, and so on of human beings. It was a total perversion of Christianity. I am fascinated with studying the historical Jesus, the establishment of the church as a social movement history of how this ragtag group of Jews, took these radicals took on the Roman Empire. That's a fascinating story. And so I've read a lot of historical books on this, like how do they do it? And what it comes back to is the historical Jesus was a radical who was introducing. So whether you believe in the spiritual aspect of that story or not, it's undeniable that the historical Jesus was a radical for promoting that the poor mattered, that you and I mattered, that all were welcome, and that we must be the poor, we must help each other, we're all in this together. It was that philosophy that put a target on his
Right.
head. And
Yeah.
there she is sitting with a diamond cross. And it's like, oh, that's so Christian of you with your diamond cross, and all these people are like, lining up at food banks right now. And
But see
refugee
again,
crisis is growing.
but yeah, but here's the thing. That's why I made the correlation with the slave owner's wife. She sleeps with the slave owner. She watches as the field hands whip the enslaved peoples, and she's perfectly okay with it. To me, I saw danger. So remember that the people that she's speaking to, they actually want that type of America where we regress. And that's the thing about that draws a correlation with Putin. And we talk about Putin's henchmen and people who are in Putin's pocket essentially. Putin is a regressive leader. Biden, what he showed in his State of the Union, he is a progressive leader. He is thinking forward. The GOP is thinking backward. They want to go back to the days where women essentially had fewer powers. They had less autonomy over their body. That's what Roe v. Wade is about. Yes, it's definitely about a woman's right to choose, but more specifically, it's about a man's right to choose for them. That's
Exactly right.
right.
Exactly
So
right.
so that's really what this is about. And we have this nut job that won a GOP nomination in North Carolina, and his name is, I believe his name is Mark Robinson, and he's the current lieutenant governor of North Carolina, and he is a person who who is extremely regressive, has said anti-Semitic things, and and the thing is that he is a black person. He's like the Trojan horse, in the so to speak, but he is just so regressive, so sexist, so anti-black, so anti-thing that is not white, that the Trojan horse through which his blackness was supposed to is supposed to operate, it's just the cover is blown, right? Because he is so extreme. But this
Mhm.
is what but this is what they want. So they take these white women who would come across as innocent, at least to their own particular contingencies within the Republican Party. They take black people like the current lieutenant governor of North Carolina who are black, and they take all these other people across the racial spectrum and parade them as being progressive simply because they're women or simply because they're people of color, right? But but Senator Britt, even though she is a woman, is actually doing more things to harm women's rights and women's autonomy than any man ever could, all because she is that white suburban mom. And you reminded me of that table that you were sitting at when you were operating as an op. And I wish that there's a photo taken of you, because I would just love to see you as a GOP op in 2004, right? But those are the type of women, you know it, you know they are participating in their own oppression. And the reality of it is that I am not sure what could be said to flip those women. I don't genuinely know. And the only thing that I know is that we must defeat them. And just like we have to defeat people like, like the current lieutenant governor of North Carolina, like we have to defeat all of these MAGA candidates that are running off racism, that's running off sexism, they want to create this world in which every leader is in the likes of Donald Trump and Victor Orban and Le Pen in France and the far right. That's what they're doing. And I think for the first time in his presidency, Joe Biden told everyone, this is what we're up against. Let me show you why I am the better choice. And he made an incredible case for himself. And so, what I hope will happen is that they'll continue to build off of that. We want the ceasefire for Gaza. We actually, and so we want him to build this coalition of diverse groups within the Democratic Party to coalesce around him, the way that the rabid contingencies are galvanizing around Donald Trump.
Mhm. So 2 things I wanna say to all that. Number 1, when people dig up old clips of Joe Biden, like stuff he said early on in his career when the status quo in Washington was far more conservative than it even is today, And people are like, oh, look at this. This is the real Biden. Look at what he said. Da, da, da. Like Anita Hill. Obviously, what he did to Anita Hill was horrible, and he's apologized for it.
Oh, it's beyond horrible. Yeah, that
It's
was one of the
beyond horrible.
worst.
It's
Yeah.
beyond horrible. It's beyond horrible. But my point is, we need more white men across America to move in the direction that Joe Biden has in recent years, even if they're still not perfect. You know what I mean? Like Joe Biden could have gone the other way. You know, he could have gone the other way. And the fact that he made it as he's learning, like a lot of white men of his generation, he's learning. He can be pushed. He can be pushed, everybody. Like we've experienced that. Ukrainians have experienced that. The fact that he came in punching, opening the State of the Union in 2024, the most important State of the Union he will ever give in his life, he opened it swinging for Ukraine with Mike Johnson shrinking and turning red behind him.
So what do you think about Mike Johnson? So I'll tell you what my little view is of him. Mike, there were so many positive things that Biden said about what he's done for the country. And by and large, the fact checkers from all the major outlets, they can say, okay, certain things were out of context and certain things weren't 100% true, but you can't say that everything that he said was just a flat out lie, right? And so generally speaking, it was very difficult to refute Joe Biden on the progress of this country. It's definitely better now than when he took it over in 2020, right? So you can definitely say that. And so if you are Mike Johnson and you're sitting in the back and he was kind of squeaming around, he was kind of smiling,
Right.
and I think that even when in his mind he wish he could stand up, but he couldn't because he's in MAGA's pocket. He couldn't do it, but I could see that being a very difficult hour or so to sit through because there's nothing much that he could say to refute what Joe Biden said. He made a better case for the country and why he ought to lead it than anything that he could conjure up in his mind at the moment. And so usually you can see people kind of shaking their heads like, no, no, whatever, right? Then when he was talking about American jobs, staying here in the United States, and how we're going to keep them here as opposed to sending them abroad. And also he was going after Donald Trump, about people being true to who they are. If you care about America, you keep jobs in America, all of those things. And he brought up Ronald Reagan, tear down this wall. And I know for certain people in that room who actually care about this stuff, that had to hurt. Now, here's the thing. I think Ronald Reagan, generally speaking, from a domestic side and even internationally, he sucks, right?
Right.
But, definitely sucks. But he did have good Soviet policy. I will never take that away from him. He had effective Soviet policy, and he was the perfect person during the close of the Cold War to be the president of the United States. Tear down this wall will be one of the most symbolic statements and moments in U.S. political history. That was the glory days of the tough on Russia GOP that we have not seen since. And so they basically called them a bunch of punks and said that Reagan would be turning over in his grave if he were alive. And the only thing that Mike Johnson can do was squeal in his seats. And so I think that this was a really fine moment. And so what we have to do with our platforms is we have to move with this and stress the importance of going to the polls and voting for Joe Biden. And so I know that New York's primary is April 2nd. That's when our primary is here in the state of New York. I am going to go to my primary voting location with bells on. I am going to spend that day on my social media talking about the importance of why I supported Joe Biden. He's going to win this state anyway. It's a heavily Democratic state. But I am going to proudly support Joe Biden. What I also want him to do is to speak to those people who are uncommitted and to speak to their hearts, right? And so as much as I am going to support Joe Biden, you are supporting Joe Biden, we're going to vote for him. I want Joe Biden to earn the respect of the rest of America who are uncommitted, because they definitely have a legitimate reason to not be committed to him based on how he has responded to Benjamin Netanyahu's overreach in Gaza. And so I think that multiple things can be true, but I think that what he did was say, what he proved is that he could be pushed. That's the main thing. He is movable if we force him. So that's why I think this uncommitted movement has been effective. And so for people like us who are going to vote for him, we're going to do it fine. But we also need to push him to bring him into the camp with the rest of us so that they can have the same fear, the same belief in him as the rest of us right now, because we know that he can be moved. And so we need to do the best in our due diligence to move him even further so that the rest of us can coalesce around him in November and keep this racist, xenophobic, sexist, serially accused of rape fraudster out of the White House.